Welcome back, or perhaps welcome for the first time, to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight we'll drift back through time, not to the grand arenas or gleaming marble statues, but to something far more human and far more forgotten. You may think of ancient Rome as the pinnacle of civilization, of togas, triumphs, and Latin eloquence echoing through marble halls. But the truth, like time, is worn down by the feet of the many, not the few. And beneath the grandeur lays something more ordinary, more enduring, and far less comfortable. So tonight we'll walk through Roman streets not as a senator or an emperor, but as someone far more common, a plebeian, a laborer, a tenant in a crowded tenement block, someone just trying to stay fed, clean, and alive. And as we move through this story, as the candles flicker and the stone beneath your feet warms in the sun, you may find your thoughts beginning to soften. You may find your breath slowing and your body relaxing. That's all right. This journey is long and steady. You don't need to stay awake to take it. Let's begin with what it was really like to live a single day in ancient Rome. The sweat, smoke, and slop of Roman street life. Imagine this. You wake up to the sour scent of damp clay and stale air. The sun hasn't risen yet, but already the heat from the day before clings to the walls around you. You lie not in a villa, but in a cramped upper floor of an insula, a Roman apartment block. The walls are thin, the floors creak, and if you're lucky, the roof doesn't leak. There's no window glass, just wooden shutters cracked open for a hint of breeze. But mostly, there is the noise. The city never truly sleeps. Beneath you, carts rattle on stone roads. Someone is already shouting in the alley. Somewhere nearby, a dog whines, and another barks in reply. You are a Roman citizen, but only just. Not a slave, but not far above one. You work in a trade. Maybe as a porter at the docks on the Tiber, or a baker's assistant, rising before the sun to tend to the oven's coals. Or perhaps you sweep the streets, though no one truly thanks you for it. There is no private latrine, no kitchen of your own. You walk down a narrow staircase that smells faintly of smoke, and yearn to reach a communal chamber pot, or more likely simply use a pot in the corner of the room. Later, you'll empty it into the gutter, just like everyone else. Outside, the day is beginning. The street is already alive with the sounds of commerce, but it isn't orderly. The carts roll heavy with grain. Donkeys bray. Hawkers cry out with words worn down by repetition. Fresh figs, warm bread, and over it all the senna mix of ash, sweat, old wine, and sewage. The kind of smell that never truly goes away, only changes with the seasons. Water must be fetched. You carry a clay jug to the nearest fountain. If the aqueduct is functioning properly, it will run clear. If not, you'll need to find another farther away. You pass a man on a litter carried by slaves. He doesn't look at you. You're invisible. Breakfast is simple, often just bread. If you're fortunate, some cheese or olives, and then to work. There are no weekends, no labor laws. You earn what you can and spend it just as quickly. In the heat of the day, the city becomes sluggish. Shadows stretch along the cracked paving stones. People retreat indoors if they can, though your room is barely cooler than the street. The flies are worse here, buzzing near the open drains that run alongside every road. You step over them like everyone else. If someone is sick beside the road, you do not stop. By late afternoon, you're tired. Your tunic clings to your back with sweat. The dust of the city clings to your skin. There are public baths, if you can afford them today, a few copper coins for entrance, and a small cloth to dry yourself. There at least you can wash away the grime until tomorrow. At night, the streets grow darker, oil lamps flicker. Thieves wait in the shadows. You walk quickly and speak little. The fire brigade patrols with buckets and poles, ready to tear down walls to stop a blaze. Fires are common. The building's dry as tinder. Your home could vanish in an hour. You climb the stairs, step over a neighbor's child sleeping in the hall, and duck back into your corner of the city. Your bed is straw. The sounds outside fade, then return. Sleep comes in waves, if at all. This is your life. Not as a Roman general, or a philosopher, or emperor, but as someone ordinary, anonymous, vital to the machinery of the city and utterly forgotten by history. And yet, the city would not function without you. Not without the thousands of lives like yours, sweating, toiling, enduring. In the morning, it begins again. The rise and fall of Emperor Commodus, now that we've walked the worn, uneven stones of Rome's working streets. Let us quietly ascend the marble steps of power, though we will not stay long in its light. Instead, we'll drift through the shadowed corridors of the imperial palace, where luxury gave way to decay, and Rome itself began to rot from within. This is the story of Commodus. He was born into splendor, Lucius Aurelius Commodus, son of the philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius. From the moment he first opened his eyes beneath the gilded ceilings of a palace, his path to absolute rule was laid out for him. The empire stretched from the reigns of Britain to the heat of North Africa. He would inherit it all, and yet, inheritance is not the same as wisdom. Imagine a young boy raised in opulence, told from birth that the gods had favored him. He needn't fight for attention nor earn his glory. Every decision he made was met not with challenge, but with applause. Commodus believed deeply that he was special divine even, and in time he would demand that others believe it too. When Marcus Aurelius died, perhaps on campaign, perhaps of play, it was Commodus who returned to Rome, not in mourning, but in triumph. At just 18 years old, he became the sole ruler of the world's greatest empire. And almost immediately, the shift was felt. Where his father had spent long years in battle, governing through reason, Commodus withdrew. He had no taste for the long meetings of the Senate, no patience for compromise or policy. He preferred the arena. You see, Commodus fancied himself not just an emperor, but a gladiator. Not in secret, but on display. While others wore togas and discussed law, he stripped to a tunic, picked up a wooden sword, and strutted through sand before cheering crowds. The matches, of course, were fixed. His opponents were often disabled or poorly armed, or terrified slaves offered a chance at freedom if they could survive the emperor's whims. And the people, at first, they laughed. Then they worried. It was not just the violence, it was the image. Commodus renamed the months of the year after himself. He demanded statues portraying him as Hercules. He was no longer a servant of Rome, but its living god. His paranoia deepened. Those who questioned him were dismissed, exiled, or quietly killed. The Senate, that old and weathered institution, sat by helplessly as the empire slid into spectacle. Whispers traveled through the marble halls of the Palatine Hill, of poisonings, of executions behind closed doors, of nights filled with drunken games that lasted until dawn, and still, the people came to the games. They watched, they cheered. Some even believed, but not all. Eventually, Commodus' own inner circle had seen enough. The final straw, perhaps, was his declaration that he would appear in the arena on New Year's Day, not as emperor, but as a god gladiator slaying beasts and men alike. Rome could take no more. And so, quietly, in the final days of the year 192 CE, his mistress poisoned his wine. When that failed to kill him, a wrestler, a man once hired for entertainment, was sent into his chamber. There, in the flickering lamplight of his private bath, the self-declared god-emperor was strangled. He died not on the battlefield, nor on a throne, but in the water, slumped, silent, forgotten by the mourning crowds. His statues were pulled down. His name was scratched from monuments. The Senate declared a damnatio memoriae, a damnation of memory. It was as though he had never ruled at all. But Rome remembered, because Commodus was not the end, only the beginning of the unraveling. His reign revealed how fragile the empire truly was, how even marble could crack, how the most powerful city on earth could be ruled by a man who preferred play acting in armor to leading armies. A city that had grown too large, too proud, too hollow to recognize its own decay. And yet, life went on. The streets still filled with footsteps. The baths still steamed. The bread still baked. And another name took his place. Because in Rome, there was always another name. Pompeii preserved misery. Let us drift south now. Down along the dusty roads of the Campania region, past the vineyards and olive groves, until we reach a city frozen in time, Pompeii. Today it is quiet. Tourists speak in hushed tones as they walk its stone streets, their footsteps echoing against walls that once heard the laughter of children, the murmur of merchants, and the ringing cries of street performers. The city feels like a whisper from the past, a place preserved not by memory, but by ash. But before it became a relic, Pompeii was very much alive. Imagine yourself walking through it, not today, but in the heat of a late August afternoon. In the year 79 of the Common Era, Pompeii is bustling. It's not a large city, perhaps 11,000 people, but it feels full. The streets are narrow and uneven, and the buildings lean slightly, casting shade over the heads of those who pass beneath. The smell of baking bread mingles with the briny tang of fish sauce garum fermenting in clay vats near the docks. A herd of goats clatters past, followed by a boy too small to control them. The city is not glamorous, it is practical. The shops along the main road sell olive oil, wine, cloth, and tools. A baker's oven glows softly with embers. Inside, loaves of bread bake in circular molds, stamped with the insignia of the house they're baked for, some for sale, others ordered by local estates. Laborers carry baskets of flour and jugs of wine, balancing them carefully through the crowd. Graffiti is everywhere, scratched into walls and doors. It ranges from political endorsements to lewd jokes, personal rivalries, and romantic hopes. In one alley, someone has written, "Successes was here." In another, "Restituta, take off your tunic, please." It's a city of appetite, of craving and coping. The bathhouses are busy. Men and women enter through separate doors, though not always at separate times. The steam rises, the marble is worn smooth, and gossip floats above the water. News from Rome, word of a festival, a neighbor's misdeeds. It all passes through the fog of the caldarium, but Pompeii is not clean. Open drains run beside most streets. Chamber pots are emptied into the gutters, and stepping stones help you cross without soaking your sandals. Flies buzz around market stalls. The amphitheater, while impressive, is ringed with stains from spilled wine and blood, both human and animal. Gladiatorial games are popular here, though not always lawful. Years before, a riot broke out between Pompeians and nearby Nucharians. The games were banned for a time, but quietly resumed. The houses vary. Some are grand, with courtyards and fountains, mosaics, and painted walls. But many are cramped, their rooms dark and hot. A family of 6 might live in 2 small chambers, their belongings stacked along the walls. Children play with clay dolls and wooden wheels. Older boys learn the art of rhetoric or help in their father's shop. Girls tend to younger siblings or weave cloth. Education, while prized, is uneven. Survival matters more. And then there's the mountain, Vesuvius. To the locals, it is simply the mountain, green and sloping, fertile even. No one remembers the last time it erupted. No one imagines it could. But the ground has been rumbling softly. A few windows have cracked. Birds fly oddly. Wells run dry. Some notice. Most do not. It is life as usual. It is the rhythm of their days until it is not. When Vesuvius erupts, it begins not with fire, but with ash. Fine and gray, it drifts like snow. At first, people gather to watch. Some flee. Others return home, thinking it will pass. The air grows thicker, hotter. The sky darkens. Roofs collapse beneath the weight of falling debris. Gas hisses from fissures, and then the pyroclastic surge. A wave of heat and ash, fast as wind, hot as a furnace. It does not burn, it suffocates. It silences. In just a few hours, Pompeii is gone, buried, but not forgotten. Because what was left behind, the loaves still in the oven, the dogs curled by doors, the people caught in their final moments, would one day be uncovered. Not immediately, not for centuries. But when it was, what emerged was not just ruin, but a city stopped mid-breath. We study it now not only for its art and architecture, but for its mundane truths. For the shoes left beneath the bed, the scrolls half read, the writing scratched in charcoal, be bold, lover. Pompeii reminds us of how little separates glory from silence, and how sometimes it is the smallest details, the cracks in the plaster, the wear on a threshold, that whisper loudest from the past. You would not last a day here, because even they did not. The villa life, decadence and dullness. We've walked among the worn and the weary through alleys, tenements and ash-covered ruins. But now let us climb up the hillside, past the farm plots and vineyards, past the workers laboring under the sun, toward the silence of marble courtyards and manicured gardens, toward the Roman villa. You might imagine it to be paradise, and in many ways it was. Sun-drenched colonnades, pools of still water, soft beds and shaded porticos. The villa was designed not merely to shelter, but to impress, to soothe, to remind those within that they had risen far above the streets of the city and the troubles of ordinary life. Imagine waking not to shouting neighbors or creaking boards, but to the gentle sound of fountains in a peristyle garden. The sun filters through silk-draped windows, and a slave silent and precise draws back the curtain with practiced grace. You do not fetch your own water. You do not bake your own bread. You do not clean the oil lamp that flickered softly through the night. All of this is done for you, quietly, invisibly. Breakfast is light. Perhaps figs, honey, and warm flatbread prepared before dawn by kitchen servants who sleep in outbuildings. Your hands are washed before and after. You recline, not sit. Chairs are for work, couches are for leisure, and yet the day is long. You are not a laborer. You are not even a merchant. Your wealth comes from land, inheritance, taxation. You do not toil. And so you fill your hours with ritual. Letters, perhaps, dictated to a slave. The management of estates read aloud by a steward. Visits to friends, but always within the right circles. A stroll in the garden. A bath, another meal, and much waiting. Afternoons drift by in soft conversation and readings of poetry or philosophy. Sometimes you host clients, those who rely on your patronage. They arrive early in the morning to greet you, to flatter, to hope for favor. It is expected, but not enjoyed. You listen. You nod. You grant small gifts, an introduction, a coin purse, a promise. The dinner is the high point of the day. It begins before sunset and can stretch for hours. Reclined once more, you are served in courses, fish and wine sauce, dormice stuffed with herbs, lamb roasted with dates. Entertainment varies. Musicians, dancers, perhaps a reading of epic verse, but even decadence becomes routine. You are surrounded by beauty, by wealth, by the soft rustle of silk and the scent of imported perfume. But you are also surrounded by walls, carefully curated, perfectly ordered, and always a little too still. Outside, the world shifts. Emperors rise and fall. The city riots. Grain shipments are delayed. Plagues whisper through the streets. But here in your villa it is always the same. Safe, quiet, predictable, and perhaps a little dull. The children are raised not by parents, but by tutors and nurses. The wives, if present, occupy their own chambers and gardens, maintaining the household gods and managing social duties. The slaves, many of them educated, cultured, even philosophical, watch everything, say little, and remember more than they are ever asked. There is a sense of performance to it all. Even the tranquility has a cost. You are never quite alone, and never quite free. Because status demands visibility, one must entertain. One must maintain reputation. One must always seem serene, dignified, generous, regardless of mood, regardless of truth. And so you learn to smile, to speak carefully, to cultivate boredom like a rose pruned, contained, and beautiful to those who never lived it. As night falls, the villa grows quiet once more. Torches flicker, slaves extinguish the lamps one by one, and you return to your chamber. The ceiling is painted with stars. Outside, in the fields, the wind stirs the olive branches. You drift into sleep, surrounded by comfort, and yet oddly hollow. Public baths, cleanliness, community, and contagion. If you were to ask a Roman where the real heart of the city beat, not politically, not militarily, but socially, you might be surprised by the answer. Not the Forum, not the Senate, but the baths. The Thermae, massive complexes, open to nearly everyone, often free or subsidized by the wealthy. More than a place to wash, they were a ritual, a rhythm, a sanctuary from the dust and clamor of the street. Imagine Mal stepping inside. The outer air still clings to you dry, full of grit, the clatter of the marketplace still echoing in your ears. But here the light dims. The ceilings rise. The scent changes, olive oil, damp limestone, and steam. You pass through a series of chambers, each with its own temperature, its own tempo. First, the appetiterium, the changing room. Rows of cubbyholes carved into stone. Slaves quietly assist their masters in removing togas, folding them neatly. Small bronze keys dangle from wrists. You leave behind not just your clothes, but your public face. Next, the tepidarium warm and welcoming. Moist air softens your skin. Gentle conversation hums around you. No shouting. No deals. Just bodies at rest. Then the coldorium. Hot, thicker air now. The kind that settles in your lungs. Pools shimmer with heat. A slave pours warm water from a bronze jug. You sit on the marble bench and sweat, deliberately, thoroughly. Some scrape their skin with a strigil, a curved metal blade used to remove oil and grime. It's not always comfortable, but it's what's done. And finally, the frigidarium, cold water. A sharp breath, a final cleansing, like stepping back into the world. You may socialize, gossip, listen to readings of poetry. Sometimes even business is done softly over steam and splashing water. There are barbers, masseurs, vendors with snacks. Some bathhouses are so vast they have libraries, gardens, even lecture halls. It was, for many Romans, the closest thing to equality. Senators and laborers, freedmen and soldiers, all stripped of status, all bare before the marble walls, but the peace is partial. Not everyone is welcome. Women must come at different hours, or not at all, depending on the bath. The poorest may not afford the entry fee. And always there are whispers of disease, of infection, of what floats unseen in the water. For all their sophistication, the baths could be breeding grounds for illness. Skin infections, fevers, coughs that linger. Still, they remained essential, soothing, addictive even, and so the cycle continued. Morning work, midday bath, evening rest. For the Romans, the bath was not luxury, it was life. Warmth, stillness, repetition, a moment to breathe, in a city that never truly stopped. Roaming roads miles, dust in the march of empire. To truly understand Rome, you must leave the city, not permanently. Just far enough to see the veins of the empire stretch out across continents, stitched into the very soil. Not temples, not forums. Roads. You may have heard the phrase, all roads lead to Rome. It was not a metaphor, it was a fact. By the peak of the empire, over 250,000 miles of roadstone laid, engineered, plans spread from the heart of the capital to the furthest edges of the known world. North into Britannia, south into Africa, east into the lands of Parthia and the Levant. Roads that crossed rivers, climbed mountains, and cut through forests with steady purpose. They were not built for ease, they were built for permanence. Now, imagine yourself walking one, the Via Appia perhaps. The Appian Way, one of the oldest, one of the straightest. Underfoot, the stones are worn smooth by centuries of sandals, hooves, and wheels. On either side, tombs rise from the roadside, quiet reminders that even in motion, Romans honored the dead. Your feet are sore, your pack is heavy, and the heat bakes the surface of the stone until it reflects upward, making the world shimmer. Insects buzz lazily near a stagnant stream. A small way station at Mancio offers rest, perhaps water, maybe shelter for the night. But mostly, there is walking, hours and hours of it. Your world becomes a rhythm, step, stone, breath, repeat. Travel was not easy, not fast, not safe. There were soldiers on the roads, certainly, messengers, tax collectors, merchants with carts full of amphorae and spices, but also bandits waiting near thickets and dens, strangers, the occasional patrol. If you're lucky, you travel with others. A caravan, a small group. You pass through milestones, literally. Carved markers placed every 1,000 paces. Some are inscribed with the name of the emperor who ordered the road's repair. Some are worn blank by time. Food, bread, olives, dried figs. Maybe a chunk of cheese. Something light, portable. You're careful with water. Refill when you can. Drink slowly. Every few miles, another roadside shrine. A statue of Mercury. A tangle of faded offerings. A clay coin. A feather. A prayer murmured more from habit than hope. Because the road is endless and strangely calming. And while these roads were first meant for war, for the fast deployment of legions, they became something more. Arteries of culture. Latin spread through these roads. So did religion, law, architecture, ideas. A conquered town became a Roman town not just by decree, but by stone, the road brought Rome to them. And for those who had to travel, the road brought Rome home. Stone by stone, mile by mile, the empire moved forward, and still, beneath the feet of travelers today, some of those very stones remain, quiet, unmoving, waiting. Bred in Circus, feeding the masses and taming the mob, back in the heart of Rome, amid the noise and press of a million restless souls. Something curious kept the city from falling into constant chaos. Bread and circus. It sounds simple, even quaint, but to the Roman state, it was a careful balance, an understanding that the human spirit, even when oppressed, could be soothed with grain and spectacle. Imagine again that you are a Roman citizen, not wealthy, not starving, somewhere in the middle, hovering on the edge of stability. You rely not just on your job, but on the state's generosity. That generosity arrives in the form of the annona, the grain dole. You receive a portion of wheat, usually monthly, collected from great shipments that arrive from Egypt and North Africa, stored in massive granaries and distributed in regular rations. It is not a feast, it is sustenance. It is what stands between you and hunger. Without it, riots begin, and the Roman authorities knew this. Now, imagine a day when your portion has been collected. Your stomach is full or full enough, but your mind is restless. Your spirit needs distraction. You walk toward the Colosseum, or perhaps the Circus Maximus. A line curls around the entrance. There are no tickets. Admission is free. Seating is by class. The senators and nobles take the shade. You, perhaps, sit in the upper rows, squinting into the sun. Below you sand, not just ordinary sand. It has been sprinkled with crushed marble and perfumed oils. The scent drifts upward, masking the sweat and blood that inevitably follow. Trumpets blare. The crowd stirs. In the Colosseum, you might witness gladiators, some slaves, some free, fighting for their lives or for glory. Their armor gleams, their movements are precise, practiced. The crowd roars at a successful strike, gasps at a slip. The final blow may be silent, or punctuated by a gesture from the emperor, sitting high above in the imperial box. In the Circus Maximus, chariot races thunder past in loops. Teams of 2 horses pull drivers around a central spine. Crashes are common, spectacular. Horses topple, wheels shatter. The crowd rises as one. Bets are made, fates are sealed. You cheer not because you are bloodthirsty, but because the world is overwhelming, because life is uncertain, because here in the dust and din there is simplicity. Winners and losers, cheers in silence, action followed by resolution, and then it ends. The crowd disperses. You return home, a little hoarse from shouting, a little sunburned but distracted. And that is the point. The empire fed you to keep you calm. It entertained you to keep you quiet. And as long as the grain flowed and the games continued, rebellion rarely came. But behind the scenes, things were fraying. The grain routes depended on weather. The arena depended on money. The people's patience depended on illusion. Bred in circuses, the poet Juvenal once wrote, are all they care about. And perhaps he was right, but the rhythm worked. For centuries it worked until it didn't. But by then, the noise had long faded. Remained religion, gods, household spirits, and quiet superstition in the grand sweep of Roman power with its legions, its laws, its towering aqueducts. You might assume the Romans left little room for the unseen, that they were practical, earthbound, too focused on control to surrender to mystery. But that would be a mistake, because in almost every Roman home, whether cramped or vast, there burned a quiet flame, and above it, the gods watched. Not the grand Olympians only, the Jupiter and Mars, the Venus and Neptune of myth and marble, but something smaller, closer, more private, the Lares and Penettes, household spirits, guardians of the pantry, the hearth, the door. You might begin your morning by offering them a scrap of food, a whisper of thanks, a pinch of salt into the fire. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical, just a small gesture in the quiet rhythm of your day. These spirits were thought to protect your home, guide your ancestors' favor, and ward off misfortune. Their shrines and lararium could be found in kitchens and courtyards, on walls darkened by lamp smoke and prayer. Even the wealthiest Romang, surrounded by statues of gods and busts of emperors, would pause each day for these small rituals. Because while the empire sprawled outward in marble and conquest, the spirit of Roman life pulsed inward in ceremony and tradition and repetition. Public religion was a spectacle. The Pontifex Maximus, high priests, festivals like Saturnalia, where gifts were exchanged and roles reversed, these were important, yes, but often political, performed with fanfare, used to reinforce order. Private religion was different. It was protective, personal. Even those who doubted the myths, the philosophers, the skeptics, still avoided walking under ladders, still whispered charms, still avoided speaking the name of the dead 3 times in darkness. Superstition lingered in the alleys. There were charms against the evil eye. Bells hung from doorways. Phallic symbols etched into thresholds, not for vulgarity, but for defense. The line between religion and folk practice blurred, and for many, dreams mattered, omens mattered. The flight of birds, the shape of a spilled cup, a cough before a sentence, each could mean something. Not always something specific, but something. Even the emperor, surrounded by advisors and soldiers, might hesitate before signing a decree if the augurs, those who read the sky and the guts, of birds warned of ill signs. To be Roman was to believe in control, but to live as a Roman was to hedge your bets, to pour a little wine into the dirt, to step carefully over thresholds, to leave offerings, just in case. And so, beneath the surface of Roman strength, pulsed the quiet world of fears, hopes, and rituals, gentle, repetitive, sometimes strange, but never meaningless, because to the Romans, the world was always watching. Roman sleep, how the ancients rested, dreamed, and endured the night. Let us end, fittingly, with the night. For all Rome's roaring noise and harsh routines, for all its stone and sweat and ceremony, There always came a time when the world slowed, and people lay down their burdens, closed their eyes, and drifted into sleep. But Roman sleep was not like ours. It came in parts, in layers, in rituals, and often in interruption. Imagine now a Roman bedroom, a cubiculum small and cool, tucked away from the central atrium. The walls are plastered in soft earth tones, maybe painted with scenes of quiet countryside or gods watching gently from above. The bed is a raised platform, no mattress, but ropes lashed across a wooden frame, covered in cloth or straw-stuffed cushions. There is no pillow in the modern sense, perhaps a folded cloak, a bundle of linen, something soft enough to rest the head. The fire outside has been put out. The oil lamps have been dimmed, though never fully extinguished. You would rarely sleep in total darkness. Even the quietest Roman homes still breathed with sound the wind, the distant calls of animals, the faint clink of pottery from another room. Sleep came in two parts. The first, a few hours after sunset. Then waking again in the night, perhaps to use the chamber pot, perhaps to think, to pray, to gaze out the shutters. This wakeful pause had no shame. It was expected, and then the second sleep, a deeper one, the one that brought dreams. Dreams, to the Romans, were not idle illusions. They were messages, warnings, sometimes from the gods, sometimes from the dead, sometimes from the self. A dream might be shared with the priest the next day, or ignored, or feared. Some kept dream journals, others simply remembered, or pretended to forget, and not all could sleep in peace. The poor might sleep in the same room as their animals, or on straw mats in cramped quarters. Soldiers slept in barracks, sometimes beneath open sky. Slaves might sleep near the door, ready to be called. The elite in grand villas with servants nearby and padded couches beneath carved ceilings. But no one, no matter how wealthy, was immune to the night. There were household spirits to appease, thieves to fear. The creak of the roof beam, the flicker of a lamp, the ache of memory. Even Rome rested uneasily. There was no clock to wake you, only the sun. Light filtering through the fabric over your doorway. Roosters, the first voices in the atrium, and the quiet realization that another day had begun. Another day of duty, of ritual, of walking worn paths and speaking well-worn words. But for a little while longer, you might stay in the stillness and listen to the echoes of a world long gone, to the steady breath of a sleeping city, to the slow return of peace. The Roman builders' sand, sweat, and stone. Not every Roman wore a toga. Most wore tunics, and most, at some point, worked with their hands. Let us now walk alongside the builders, the ones who shaped Rome not with scrolls or speeches, but with bricks and mortar, lime and labor. The hum of a Roman worksite was constant. It began early as the sun crept over scaffolds. No machines, just strength, just systems. Just men rising onto rickety wooden frames to build walls that would still be standing 2,000 years later. Imagine the rhythm of it. Stone hoisted on pulleys, mortar slapped into joints. The scrape of trowels, the rasp of saws through fresh-cut timber. the crack of a whip sometimes when effort slowed. Roman concrete opus cementitium was a marvel, made of volcanic ash, lime, and water. It was poured into wooden molds, packed tight between brick or stone facings. It hardened over weeks and lasted for centuries. You wouldn't know these things working as a laborer. You'd know only the dust, the ache in your back, the sting of lime in your eyes, the heat caught between stone walls under a relentless Mediterranean sun. Lunch was simple: bread, olives, maybe a handful of raisins. You ate quickly, sitting in shade if there was any. Then back to work. Some were slaves, some were free. Some were citizens, some somewhere in between. Status blurred on the scaffold. What mattered was speed, precision, endurance. You might help raise an aqueduct, watch it climb across valleys, carrying water to places you'd never go. You might help pave a road smooth stones laid by hand, then never walk it again. You might stack bricks to build a bathhouse, a villa, a warehouse, structures you'd never enter for people who would never learn your name. But your work endured. Long after you rested, long after your tunic frayed and your hands stiffened with age, your walls stood, and still do, in ruin, in shadow, in silence. You didn't build to be remembered. You built because it was your job, because it paid, because you had to, and the city rose because of you. The Roman firefighters, the silent watch, and the smoky night has fallen. The lamps flicker, the voices grow faint. The shutters are drawn. But for some in Rome, this is when the work begins. Fires were constant, feared, and never far. The city was a maze of flammable materials, wooden beams, dry straw roofs, cloth canopies hanging above alleys, oil lamps left too close to drapes, cook fires stoked too long, sparks from a forge, the wrong gust of wind. A single ember could reduce a whole block to ash, and so they watched. The vigils, Rome's firefighters. A chorus of thousands created not out of kindness but necessity. After the Great Fire in 06C, it destroyed large parts of the city. Emperor Augustus formed a standing force, not soldiers. Not politicians, just men trained to find, fight, and stop the flame. Imagine their rounds: heavy sandals on stone, bronze helmets, cloaks for warmth, buckets at the ready, hooks, ropes, vinegar-soaked claws to smother sparks. A few carried horns. If a fire broke out, the alarm would not come with bells, but with a long, low blast through the sleeping streets. Sometimes it was simple: a smoking oven, a poorly tended lamp. Other times, it wasn't. You're shaken awake in the insula. The air is thick. Someone shouts. The stairs are crowded. You descend in the dark, clutching a pot with your belongings, a cloak, a coin, a figurine. Outside, the sky is orange. The flame dances on rooftops. The vigils are already there. They form lines passing buckets hand to hand, tearing down walls to stop the spread, dousing embers with sand. If needed, they'll even collapse part of a building to create a fire break. It's dangerous, chaotic, and quiet in the wrong way. When the flames fade, what's left behind is rarely whole. Soot-blackened walls, ash where a roof once stood, weeping children. The smell bitter damp final lingers long after. And yet, by the next night, the vigils are back on patrol, walking, listening, watching for light where there should be dark. They were often mocked, sometimes feared, occasionally corrupt. But without them, Rome would have burned far more often. And so they remained, the watchers in the quiet, the calm in the smoke, the ones who stood still when others fled. While the rest of the city dreamed, they stayed awake. Romang market's noise, negotiation, and the smell of morning, long before the streets grow warm beneath the rising sun. Before the bathhouses steam or the senators argue, Rome begins with the market, Misellum. Imagine it now, still dim with dawn mist, but already stirring. Stalls creak open. Cloth awnings snap softly as they're tied in place. Vendors arrive with baskets balanced on shoulders. Amphorae are rolled into place. The scent of the morning settles olive oil, whetstone, fish, smoke, and the sharp sweetness of citrus peel crushed underfoot. You're just one among hundreds, a citizen, a house servant, a baker's apprentice. Your list is short, perhaps a wedge of cheese, a bunch of herbs, a jar of garum, the strong-smelling fermented fish sauce beloved by nearly every Roman table. The stalls cluster in sections, meat in one corner, fruit in another, chickpeas, barley, jars of honey sealed with wax, baskets of eggs still feathered with straw. Vendors call softly, their voices not yet the shouts they'll become. Fresh figs, still warm from the sun, oysters from Ostia, linen from Alexandria. Touch it, just touch. The money changes hands slowly. There's no fixed price. Everything is a negotiation. You point to a melon, the vendor squints, names a number. You frown, offer half. He laughs, you walk away. He calls you back. You settle somewhere in the middle. It's the same dance every day. Children dart through the crowd. A small boy tries to snatch a pomegranate and gets cuffed lightly by a baker. A dog thin but confident sniffs beneath tables, hoping for scraps. Overhead, gulls wheel and call, drawn inland by the smell. You pass a spice cellar. His table is lined with neat clay bowls, cumin, cinnamon, coriander, black pepper from India. You'll never afford them, but you pause, breathe in. Just for a moment. At the far end, there's a man who sells scrolls. Not many stop there, not today. But he sits patiently, unrolling them one by one. He does not speak. He waits. The sun has risen now. The noise swells. A Roman market at its peak is not a peaceful place, but it is a familiar one. And there's comfort in that. The rhythm of walking the same lanes, of buying from the same woman, of knowing which baker's bread stays soft and which doesn't. The market is loud, yes, but it's predictable, earthy, grounded, and when your arms are full and your coin purse a little lighter, you make your way home through streets now glowing with heat. You'll cook, you'll clean, you'll rest, until morning comes again. And the stalls creak open once more. Romang education, wax tablets, tutors, and the weight of words. Let us settle now in a quiet corner of Roman life, away from the noise of the forum, away from the smell of the street market and the echo of sandals in the baths. Let us step into the small, sun-dappled room where learning begins. Roman education was not compulsory. There were no standardized classrooms, no government mandates. But for those with means or ambition, learning was a lifelong duty, a mark of civility, a gateway to status. You are a Roman child, perhaps the son of a merchant, or the daughter of a retired centurion. Your home is modest, but you are fortunate. You've been sent to a ludus, a private school, often held in the back room of a shop or beneath a shaded arcade. The day begins early, before the heat settles into the clay tiles. You walk to school through the scent of baking bread and wet limestone, the coolness of morning still clinging to your tunic. You carry a bag made of woven reed. Inside, your tabulae serrae wooden tablets coated with dark beeswax, a stylus, and maybe, if you're lucky, a single scroll, hand-copied, precious. Your ludi magister the schoolmaster waits. He is not always kind, not always patient. He is often poor himself. Sometimes a freedman, sometimes a failed writer. He speaks Latin, of course, but also Greek. Homer is quoted as often as Virgil, and you are expected to learn both. You sit on a rough stool, not in rows, not by age, but by ability. You begin to copy letters into wax, carving each stroke with care. The wax is smooth when warm, but if the room is cold, the stylus sticks and the lines are jagged. You scrape it clean and begin again. The master speaks slowly, then repeats, then quizzes. The alphabet, simple phrases, lists of nouns. Aquila, he says. You murmur eagle, rex, king, over and over. The room smells of oil lamps and chalk dust. Ink stains the master's fingers. A boy next to you fidgets. A girl across from you recites lines under her breath. You are surrounded not by silence, but by the quiet hum of repetition, of effort, of memory. Later you read aloud. Latin slowly, then Greek. The words feel strange in your mouth, rounder, heavier, but you learn to pronounce them, then to understand them, then to think in them. By midday, the heat becomes a third student in the room. Sweat dots your brow, the wax grows soft. The words blur. You pause, drink water from a clay cup, then return to your tablet. Some students leave after this. They return home, help in shops, tend to chores. Others stay for more. They learn rhetoric, how to persuade, how to speak before a crowd, not loudly, but well. They memorize long speeches by Cicero, practicing gesture, rhythm, poise. They learn how to ask a question that feels like an answer, how to answer in a way that avoids the question. This is not just language, it is power. Words to the Romans were as sharp as swords, and those who mastered them rose. Outside, the sun begins to fall. Your wax is worn down, the stylus dull. Your scroll is rolled carefully and tied with string. You step into the street again, a little older than when you entered. Tomorrow, you will return, and the letters will come easier. But for now, You walk home under a golden sky, your thoughts full of syllables, and the soft scrape of stylus on wax still echoing in your ears. Roman clothing, wool, status, and the weight of fabric. Let us dress now as the Romans did, but not quickly, not thoughtlessly, because in Rome, clothing was never just about warmth or modesty. It was about meaning, about law, about identity. A garment told others where you stood, your class, your gender, your citizenship, even your mood. Imagine yourself on a cool morning, standing barefoot on the stone floor of your domus. The marble tiles are smooth and chilled from the night air. A small window lets some light, slanting through the dust in golden beams. Before you, folded neatly on a wooden chest, is your clothing for the day. First, the tunica. For men, a simple woolen tunic, pulled over the head and tied at the waist. For women, perhaps a longer version belted twice, once below the chest and again at the waist. Wool, always wool. Linen if you're rich. Cotton or silk, only if you've traveled far or are extremely privileged. The fabric is scratchy, heavy when humid, stiff when dry. It holds the memory of every movement. Next comes the toga if you're a citizen. Not everyone wears it, not often. It's cumbersome. A long, wide piece of wool, carefully wrapped over one shoulder, under the other, then draped again. You cannot put it on alone. It takes help, practice, balance, and once worn, it restricts. You walk slower, sit differently. Your right arm remains partially bound, but it speaks. White for the average citizen. Off-white with a purple border toga praetexta if you hold office or are of high rank. Pure white. Bleached bright toga candida if you seek election. Each variation whispers your intent, and for women, the stola, a long, layered dress often paired with a shawl called a palla, dignified, modest, flowing. Children wore smaller tunics. Boys of status might wear a bulla, a small charm around the neck to ward off evil. Slaves wore little simple tunics, never togas. Sandals, sole, were tied with leather straps. The rich might have softer solace, the poor rougher. Indoors, many walked barefoot. You notice the small things, the scent of lanolin in the wool, the way the fabric clings slightly after washing, the rustle of layers as you move, the tug of the belt, not too tight, but enough to feel present. Jewelry was light, unless you were wealthy. A fibula to fasten the cloak, a ring often iron, sometimes gold. Not for fashion, but for signal. A senator's ring, a merchant's clasp, a widow's veil, and when you stepped into the street, others knew. They read your garments before they heard your voice, before they knew your name, because in Rome, clothing did not hide the body. It revealed the soul and the system, and you wore it all wool, dust, dignity, and duty like a second skin. Roman entertainment, sandals, spectacles, and the cost of a crowd. Step into the heart of the Roman crowd. Not the quiet hum of the library, not the stillness of the temple, but the roar, the applause, the sandals stomping stone. Entertainment for the Romans was not just leisure. It was identity, unity, a show of power and people. You begin your morning not with silence, but anticipation. The streets fill early. Citizens pour out of buildings, draped in cloaks, clutching figs or flatbread. Vendors shout above one another nuts, wine, sausages on skewers. Children climb ledges for better views. The games are today, and the Colosseum awaits. The amphitheatrum Flavium vast, tiered, a mountain of stone and shadow. It looms over the city. Its arches open wide like mouths. You find your place in the crowd. The seating is layered by class. Senators closest, then equestrians, then citizens. Slaves and women in the highest, sunniest rows. The sun rises higher. A trumpet blares. The sand is raked. The gates open. You watch. Not just for blood, though there will be that, but for ritual. For rhythm, the train dance of movement, the ceremony of death. First come the animal hunts, Venetians imported beasts from across the empire, lions from Numidia, bears from the forests of Gaul, ostriches, crocodiles. Their handlers wave spears and nets. The animals lunge, hesitate, circle. The crowd gasps, but always the human has the last say. Next, the execution's noxy. Criminals condemned to die, often made to reenact famous myths before perishing. A Prometheus chained, a Hercules undone. Theater with no curtain call. Then the main event, the gladiators. Some are slaves, others volunteers seeking fame or coin. They train at the ludus under strict discipline. They learn not just how to fight, but how to fall. Today, a Retiarius, lightly armored, armed with net and trident, faces a secutor, heavier, rounded helmet, short sword. The net is cast. It misses. The crowd groans. The secutor charges. They circle, feint, lunge. A cut, one falls, and then silence. All eyes turn to the editor of the games. A thumb is raised or turned. The victor leaves, sweat slicked and slow. The loser does not, but not all entertainment is violent. In the evening, you might attend the theater comedies by Plautus, dramas by Seneca, or the circus chariot races at the Circus Maximus. The pounding of hooves, the thunder of wheels, a blur of dust and muscle. You cheer, you eat, you argue over drivers. Blue versus green, and by night your throat is hoarse. Your mind filled with images of movement and motion. You return home slowly, still humming the chant of the crowd, still hearing the rhythm of the race. Because for one day you were not alone. You were part of the Roman crowd, and tomorrow it begins again. The quiet shadows of the empire now let us settle back. The dust of the day clings softly to your sandals. The scent of oil lamps hangs in the air. Somewhere far off, a fountain gurgles. The city that never truly sleeps has gone still for a moment. You've walked its avenues, sat in its cramped classrooms, listened to the chatter of the baths, the rustle of wool against skin, the cheers of the circus. You've eaten its bread, ducked beneath its arches, felt the heat of its stone streets beneath your feet. Rome, in all its grandeur and grime, was never one thing. It was contradiction made stone, power and poverty, noise and silence. spectacle and routine, and for a little while you were there, not as an emperor, not as a gladiator, but as one of the many, a voice in the crowd, a hand in the flower, a breath among thousands. Now that city fades. The walls dim, the torches flicker low, the empire sleeps. And so perhaps should you. Good night. And thank you for walking through history with me.